My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sangran, Guru Piranyo, fellow Nyanis. Today, I'm going to start Mahan's I God principle, philosophy, and I'm going to continue with the first principle, part 3. In the last satsang, I spoke about the small I and the big I, gave you the description of the small I and what the description of the big I is. I also spoke about how the small I has a limited frequency, a limited, frequency of this material world. The material, everything in this universe has a frequency, and and all things which has frequency uh, varies according to from the galaxies to the nebulas to the stars to the planets to everything in this world, from insects to animals to plants to human beings. And even among human beings we have different frequencies, right? So the question then is that what is this small I and the big I? And Swamiji spoke about this I is nothing but the bold potential. And this bold potential energy is inherent in the atom. And from there, this bold potential can also become what we call kinetic or, dynamic energy. So it can change between potential and dynamic. And one aspect of the dynamic energy is all the biological beings, including human beings. And Swamiji speaks about the small I. The small I is nothing but, a limited identity, limited frequency. And this limited frequency has, nature has built each of those biological beings with its own characteristics, with its own instincts. And we human beings have instincts that are, embedded in all of us, in our DNA. So we have qualities such as anger, hatred, jealousy, fear, proud, happiness. All those things are there as nature's embedded us. It's for survival of the species. And some of this, and you see that over as the moment a child is born, the child may not have adequate knowledge to function in this material world. So it will need a lot of assistance. And over time, the child, through the parents, learn new things. And then when they go to school, learn new things. And as the child is growing, it's learning new things, new rules about this material world. So all the knowledge that it learns is about the material knowledge. So if you see everything that we have learned so far from our parents, from our teachers, everything is material. If we are very lucky, we have parents and teachers that teach us not just about the material things, but also about the spirit. What is that which animates this material world? You know, in previous in families, some families which are very religious or spiritual, they teach the children about what this material life is and what is underpinning this material life. And the parents are well knowledgeable and they're able to impart this knowledge. In other families, this is not there. So the children grow up very materialistic. And you see that as they grow, there comes a stage where it is hard for them to connect back what is, animating all these material things. So it has some limited identity, and oftentimes it lacks illumination. Many things it doesn't know. And over time, it learns, it becomes more and more enlightened. And the learning also has an impact on the type of illumination one gets. If the learning is very narrow, then the worldview that they have is very narrow. If it's more universal and encompassing, you see that their, mind becomes more expansionary. So there are varieties of people with different frequency, at least mental and intellectual frequency. So Swamiji also speaks about that which has this limited frequency, the small I, is also from a bigger continuum, which is within all of us. You know, we may not know it, but it is there. It is what that powers our material identity. And he says this substratum, or this thing called the big I, is paripurnam. Paripurnam is complete. You know, what does that mean, complete? When the time when you were a young child, less than 2 or 3 years old, you didn't know anything. You didn't know anything about this material world, but something kept you, sustaining you, making you breathe, making you, and that is this substratum that is deep inside you. You know, that which the substratum that learned from your parents and learned from your teachers until you became more self-sufficient and being able to function. Prior to being functional in this material universe, there was always something that was always making you, keeping you alive, keeping you sustainable and sustaining you. So this, over time, as we become more and more material, we forget it, you see. And this substratum is comprehensive, very subtle. The frequency is very, very subtle. It is also universal, that because everybody has this, you know, all of us have this big I that is powering our small I. And it is in the state of the most peaceful and tranquility. All of us have this component too. So we have the small I and we also have the big I. How do we know we get into the state of peace and tranquility? Every day when we go to sleep, we go to that state of that peace, tranquility. The entire material world, the entire small I identity disappears. So in all of us, we have this big I. How is it that we don't we miss the big I in our day-to-day activities? We experience it. Even in that experience of deep sleep, people don't ask, what happened to me? Just say I slept. But nobody sits down and analyze actually what happened in the deep sleep. Where was I? What was I? Who am I? See, most people don't ask that question. Only very few people like Mahan and other great saints will ask this question. In the deep sleep state, my whole identity disappears. When I'm awake, my material identity comes back. So it is like going to a performance, where you have to put all the clothings, and as soon as you finish, you remove the clothings. So while you have the clothings, you have to play a particular character, and when you finish it, you have to drop off that costumes and so on. He says in that same way, so who is the real person? Is the one with the costume or without the costume? So again, these are the questions that great saints and sages have, deep thinkers have. And Swamiji too had this question. What happened in sleep? Can I replicate this in while my waking state? So Swamiji speaks about waking sleep. That means while your mind is still awake, the mind goes to that quiet level, that honorable level. So this is what I want to speak about. Why is it that we cannot experience it? Why is it a normal, ordinary person cannot experience it, or unable to experience this? And what kind of knowledge that will give you to experience this big I? So we see that ordinary human beings have this limited consciousness, the limited identity, which is instinct driven, lack the illumination. They only are within this box, you see, and they're unable to cognize all these things on the left hand and the right hand side. So what we cannot cognize, we say this is, a blind spot or irul. So we see that even God, based on our limited identity, we characterize God as humans, as with hands and legs and all those things. In essence, God is that infinite, formless, dimensionless. But because of our limited consciousness, because of the mold that we have in our mind that is unable to break away, we even characterize God as many, many things that many of it looks like us, which is okay. You see, because that's what the mold that we have. And we are taking a formless, substratum and putting it into form, and you would get a formed version of the God. So this is what most of us do, and which is okay. Like a mud, you put it in a mold that gives you a pot. That's what the pot becomes. But the pot is also the mud. You see, so the essence of the pot is the mud. In that same way, whatever we see materially as we characterize as God is also made of that substance. And the person that is characterizing it also is made of that substance. And the person that is asking the questions and seeking is also made of the same substance. Only thing is that the person may not be aware of it. So, to be aware of this, Swamiji then says, how do we then step away or expand our frequency to a higher level of consciousness? And this is where the meditation is very important. Slowly silencing that material, uh, you know, uh, experiences, and bringing our inward attention from external attention to inward, from an external pilgrimage to an internal pilgrimage. And we start doing that, you see that prior to that, our consciousness is very limited. As we start meditating, our consciousness starts expanding. And I'm going to talk about why that happens. Right? So we see that as time goes on, as we intensify our meditation, it starts off maybe, when we first start off, we may not be aware of it. We start practicing meditation 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, we see that our consciousness expands a little bit. As we practice for an hour and then we carry that vibration for 2 hours while we're eating breakfast or having our shower or driving our cars, we become more and more attuned. And we see that that vibration, that unarvu, that quietude expands into not just, in the meditation state, in every of our actions. And slowly, slowly, you see our interaction with the world becomes more conscious and more with a lot of quietude and sublimity and a lot of harmony. And we see that that starts expanding again further to the next phase. And you see that you become more and more universal. And as we become, finally, the ultimate state is that completeness of, I understand, I am part of, Nan Kadavul, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that. All those, glimpses will start taking place. So this is an evolution. It requires effort because all the while we have been so attuned to the material world that the mind is wedded and welded to the material world, because the material world goes through transformation. For it'll give rise to something, sustain for a while, dissolve. So there's continuous cycle that takes place. So our mind too goes through that evolution. So to break away from that cycle, this deep introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation will give us the transcendental quality that you see that, even the material world, there is something underlying this material experience. There's something underlying this material interactions. And we see that we are able to start getting a more complete understanding of things, more comprehensive and very deep understanding of everything that is, we cognize, and we see it as a frequency. As we go, as we become more and more aware, that clarity comes in. With the clarity comes a better awareness and experience of that universal dimension that manifests as that material identity too. So we get a sense of peace and tranquility. So this is why Swamiji said that, Unaru Gavadipa, always keep your mind anchored onto that vibration, that divine cosmic vibration. So I want to come back to why many of us don't get it. So this is the convergence that I want to speak about. So you see that in all of us, we have a material identity, and that material identity has a frequency. And that frequency gives us, smell, taste, touch, all those things. And interestingly, that frequency, multiplicity, what does that mean? We have 5 senses. We have sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. These are like 5 rivers, 5 senses that are bringing information to us, to our brain. And the brain needs to coordinate all of them, you see, and it coordinates it and gives us an experience. It combines, it gives us an experience, and that experience gives us thoughts, because thoughts is a measure of experience. So some of the good experiences we retain, some of it, so we retain many of those experiences. And these experiences, you see that though it's multiplicity, many, sight, sound, not only we have five, different types of information that is coming in, but we also have continuous changes. So we are continuously being bombarded by information that is being coordinated by the mind. And the mind coordinates it into from multiplicity to two. Either that experience we like it or the experience we don't like it. It is called sukha and dukkha. There are experiences that give us dukkha. That means we don't like it, very negative, makes us feel bad, all those things. That's dukkha. And there are some experiences that make us happy and joyful. And so we see that this multiplicity that we have, this small I has, gives us a duality, likes and dislikes. There are some things very, very, we like it very much. Some things we don't like very much. So there's a continuum, but yet it is two, sukha and dukkha. So most human beings bounce between the sukha and dukkha. Sometimes the sukha is so great, very high, sometimes very low. So many people go through ups and downs, very volatile. And they find it hard. When things are really good, they get very happy, very exuberant, and then suddenly next day it comes down. So many people go through this cycle of life, sukha and dukkha. And there are moments where it's extreme, it causes major problems. And the problems are that they, like a lot of great things, when things don't happen, they get very disappointed. Many of them go into depression, various other disorders starts creeping in. So, and you see that at the present moment where, with COVID, many people are very worried about their jobs, health. So there's a lot of, mental stress that is going on at the present moment. And this is part and parcel of life. Some are able to handle it, some are unable to handle it, some get distracted by this. So the great saints and sages, and including Mahan, says, look, this multiplicity breaks down to the duality. And most people oscillate between the two. And the frequency can be very high or very low. So, and all our lives, we actually bounce between this sukha and dukkhas. Things that we like, we crave. Things that we don't like, we push away. But you see, in all these things, we see that sometimes challenges is what makes us more stronger. Challenges is what polishes our mind. Challenges is what makes us, lift our game. So if we push away the challenges, we won't learn. And when a challenge comes, it is very difficult for us to manage. So in this context, you see that most people are in stage one and stage two, multiplicity to duality. They bounce between the two. This is where they find it hard to break away from that small I, the limited personality. And this is where Mahan comes in. He says, yes, you are bouncing between back and forth. I will teach you a simple method to anchor your mind from that sukha and dukkha to just one thought. And that one thought is the unarvu. Anchor your mind onto that unarvu, the kundalini force. He says, whatever you do, unarvu kavanipa, focus on that thought. You see, and what you see is that as you are going up in your experience, it brings you back to that unarvu. As you are going down, it brings you back. Over time, the fluctuation starts getting lower and lower until you come to only one state, which is the unarvu state. Is it? So your mind is no more fluctuating between this material experience of sukha and dukkha. And you see that the mind becomes more quieter, more quietude. The frequency starts dropping. And all you have is the mind is focusing on the life force. The life force is the kundalini. Life force is actually the primordial spark. Life force is actually the cosmic the as I mentioned, the from light to sound to the cosmic vibration. Now your mind is anchored onto the cosmic vibration. It neutralizes the sukha and dukkha. You attain a state of samatva. Samatva is equanimity. Now, this is still in the third stage, not the final stage. You see, as you go deeper, even that unarvu disappears to that state of nothingness, that irul, that state of that higher order continuum which transcends sound, space, our four-dimensional universe. We become transcendental to the material universe. You go back to the primordial atom and you transcend that even before the primordial atom. And this is what Swamiji's meditation teaches us. This state is called the big I state. In all the states, state one and state two is the small I state. In state three, we are slowly converging. There's a convergence that is happening. Finally, at the fourth stage, we attain that big I state. In that big I state, the frequency of the mind drops at a very low level. Only the basic bodily functional frequency is left to keep your heart and lungs and everything else beat. Even if that drops, you see that the body will drop off. So that state is called the self-realization state. What do I mean by self-realization state? That is the state that you attain that universal identity, that convergence to that primordial, the big I. That state I call the self-realization state. The self-realization state is that the state, the first S is silence realization. Silence means the entire material universe folds back, the small I folds back into that big I. Everything, time, space, sound, everything falls back to that formless, dimensionless, higher order continuum. That's what we mean by silence realization. So when the mind attains that silence, that quietude, the mind, all these material experiences and thoughts just folds back into its primordial state. In that state, you are no more limited. You have that expanded consciousness. You're no more limited by, your bodily experiences or your mind that is caught up by the body. It is now at that infinite continuum where you feel so expanded. The entire universe is part of you and you are part of that universe. And you see that that expanded consciousness is the second door. So the first door is that silence or quietude. The second door is that expansion of that consciousness from that small I to the big I. In that state, the third door opens, the liberation. You're no more caught up in that, the karmic laws or cause and effect. You become transcendental. And the final door opens is the finality. I am that. And this is what Swamiji's I God philosophy is. This is convergence that takes place. In that convergent state, you attain that universal qualities and that experiences. You actually experience this, as you start meditating intensively, you see that you're not touched by, before you get agitated, actually you're not touched by it anymore. It's okay, never mind, let it go, and you become more gentler. And you see that when you attain that universal state, your mind attains that universal lens. When the mind attains that universal lens, it is no more from outside that is making the change inside. The mind with this universal lens will start refining the senses. The senses will start seeing things in a more universal way. All your senses will see things in a more universal, more subtle, more refined ways. What others may capture things in a more grosser way, you'll be able to understand things in a more subtle way. What all this means in a more deeper, so you have a more deeper understanding of things. And this is what that fourth stage of that self-realization is. So to attain that self-realization, Mahan devised this meditation method, which is his three stages of initiation. And the three stages of initiation is to awaken the awareness, ensure that your body is strong as a flow takes place, and the crest eyes to give you that universal experience. So this is what the meditation does. You see that the meditation completely reconfigures the brains. Before, you see the normal person, the pattern is all over, the energy flows all over, and we see that a lot of fMRI imaging of the brain shows that when you meditate, the energy starts concentrating at the center. You see, and what we see is that eventually it becomes more and more focused at the center. The energy becomes more synchronized, and we see that parts of the brain where we have the pituitary pineal glands become more harmonized. We see that the it balances between both the left and the right hemisphere, and each of them have their own function in terms of how we interact, how we comprehend, how we make sense of this world. And we see that it becomes more organized as opposed to more random. And I'll show you why this is very important. And this is where, when you start practicing the meditation, the crest eye becomes very cool and nice. It's because of that energy flow that one gets. This is another example that shows using the fMRI, which shows why the meditation has a major transformative change. Why meditation, introspection, contemplation, reflection is very important. It shows that certain regions in the brain is very important because there are neural pathway that plays an important role to bring information, analyze information, make sense of the information, and it helps with concentration and focus. We see that a lot of our frontal lobe is very important for concentration, awareness, reasoning. So you see parts of the brain which is really important in terms of keeping out unnecessary information and only bringing information that is relevant. And this is a quality called viveka. Viveka means to be able to keep that which makes the mind shrunken, and absorb information and knowledge that makes the mind deeper and more expanded. And there are parts of the brain that does that. And one can only achieve that if one practices that introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, as shown by Mahan. So again, we see that, part of the awareness, the reasoning becomes more better, our emotional state becomes better. And we see that most important is that we are able to process information much more better. And as we process information much more better, we have better understanding of the universe around us, and understanding of who we are, and understanding of that bigger continuum called the big eye. So there are various medical things that actually shows why meditation is very important. And I'm going to show you some scientific work that shows how Swamiji's notion of that small eye to the big eye, and what is it that you experience when you see that convergence that takes place. So these are all scientific work that actually people have done, that shows that meditation and mindfulness actually helps us with cognitive flexibility, ability to think creatively, ability to move information, ability to retrieve information, ability to make sense. As I told you, as our awareness become greater, the nape eye is where our memory and all those things. We see that as we strengthen both the nape and our awareness, we see that our memory bank becomes better. It's able to unlock things that are infused in us and also make sense of the information we have. So we have better cognitive flexibility to be able to react, to be able to be responsive, to be able to be agile in our thinking and our creativity. And that's what meditation gives us. And why this is very important, we see that the other thing also it does is that it also helps us to focus. It helps us to be more efficient. Our brain becomes more efficient in processing information. It leaves out things that are not necessary and takes what is necessary. So what may take you 8 hours will take you maybe 8 minutes to do this. So this is what mindfulness meditation, and at least Mahan's meditation, that has helped me. So when I experienced it, I said there must be something happening here. And being a scientist, I started searching. There must be something that this meditation does. And yes, There are many scientific literature that shows that this meditational experiences gives you a more universal experience, as what Mahan speaks about, the convergence from the small eye to the big eye. This is another study that shows, top scientific work that shows that, when people meditate, people who are meditators actually take a universal outlook. They don't worry about race, religion, biasness, everything. They're able to transcend that. Somewhat like Swamiji, he transcend all religion, race. He said, I've left, all this, and became a universal identity. And there's a very nice quote that says that, we are here to awaken from the illusion of separateness and this connectivity, the connection with that infinite. And this reminds me of a quote that Swamiji said, somebody asked him, how often do you meditate? He says, Swamiji is meditation, meditation is Swamiji. What does that mean is that you're always in the connected state. You're always in the state of exuberance, blissful, powered by it. So this is what meditation gives us. And that is very important for us to have that mental stamina and the intellectual stamina to go deeper and expand our bandwidth to be able to process that information and expand that information to move from the narrow band to a wider band. Again, we see that literature after literature that shows it improves awareness, attention, focus, discipline, it instills discipline, and more importantly, it improves our quality of life. You see, and the quality of life comes when you have that happiness. Swamiji says that by practicing this, summa irukum sugam. Summa irukum sugam is that you have that beautiful, blissful, joyful experience. What he was experiencing are being experienced by all these people that went into this study. And if one who's practicing this, you'll see that you always are happy and ready to learn new things and take on new things. So what we see here is that this paripurnam, completeness, what Swamiji is teaching, the small eye to the big eye, it gives you that completeness. What does that mean? What are the outcomes of the convergence? What can you experience? What are the milestones that you will experience? You see, the day you start practicing meditation, Swamiji says you practice this for 21 days intensively, you will see the change in you. You see, Swamiji, when he started practicing, he saw the mirror and he could see the tejas, the glow in him. And the same thing happens to all of us, those who practice this intensively. So you should have your own milestone, and you see that you get better focus. Whatever you're doing, your life becomes more and more focused. There's less anxiety and worry. You become more creative. You get new ideas, and wonderful ideas. If you are a poet, you'll have beautiful poetry. If you're a musician, you'll be able to compose new things. If you're a scientist, you get amazing insights. That's what this convergence gives you. It gives you a wider band for your intellect and your mind to operate. It opens up the creativity of nature. And we see that as how nature is so creative, that entire creativity is embedded in us. So it opens up the entire treasure of nature. We become more compassionate because, compassion comes when we are full, we are confident of ourselves. We can offer help. There's nothing that we give will take anything away from us, and it is, as you give more, you see that you receive more. You have better memory. As I said, our memory banks become more stronger. We have less stress. This point is very important. More gray matter. The more we meditate, introspect, contemplate, and reflect, and particularly as you're aging, this is very important because when you age, the gray matter in our brain starts shrinking, and we see that, when the gray matter shrinks, we have forgetfulness, and most people who don't use it will lose it eventually. So when you meditate, when you introspect, contemplate, reflect, think about really, really challenging things and try to find solutions to it, that gray matter in us, in our brain, starts expanding. Why is that the case? The electromagnetic field in our brain expands. Our neural pathway, is continuously fired. It's so bandwidth, our neural connectivity starts continuously expanding. And when that expands, it expands the gray matter. When the gray matter expands, the ability to concentrate, the ability to analyze becomes better. And we see that, when the frontal and the hippocampus expands, we see that we have better mental stamina, we have better stability, we have better focus, mental health is really great, our concentration is really good. So as we age, this is very important. That gives us cognitive flexibility. As you age, sometimes you lose flexibility, but when the brain is strong, you get amazing flexibility. You're able to regulate your own behavior, discipline. You get a sense of contentment and peaceful, and everything that makes your mind more expanded and expansion takes place. So this is what that continuous until you say, aha, I got it, I know who I am. And that is what the convergence of Swamiji is talking about, that intensive meditation is very important. So in this, Swamiji says that, you know, when he attained that, he says, I am thee and thou art I. He says that, the small I and the big I is the same. And they are actually that God, which we are talking about. He says that thyself and myself are nothing but the same I. So the small I comes from the big I. So if that's the case, then the small I can take instructions from the big I. The small I can converge to become the big I, right? Is it by doing that, my material personality and my spiritual personality becomes one. What does that mean? All the things that I do in the material world will become divine and spiritual, right? So somebody asked me this question, Guru, um, you know, although I'm practicing meditation, I try to be very tolerant, and and then I tell myself, I should be more harsh. I should be, why am I putting this facade? I say, if that's what you're thinking, that's what the mind is. When the mind is thinking in a very gross way, what comes out is also very gross. If the mind is very harsh, what comes out is also very harsh. What you see is very harsh. If the mind is fractured, what you see is all becomes fractured. But if your mind is universal, all you see is a universality. And this is what Swamiji is teaching, of the convergence of the small I to the big I, you know. And by doing this intensive search, intensive tapas, intensive introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, Swamiji attained that ultimate, he says, seeking that inaccessible God by the ceaseless subjective search. It wasn't a search outside, the search within himself, that inward. I realized within myself God in its entirety, the paripurnam. When the mind and the intellect experiences this paripurnam, or the God in entirety, it becomes that. And this is why this grand master went around the world, even he's 80 years old, he was imparting this knowledge. Many people have met him. Many people really did not, take to it, and really use it to their full advantage. But you see that they saw him only as a bodily person. Those who saw him in a universal identity that held on to it were able to, follow his footstep to become, that state. And this is where we see that, you know, if we get a particular knowledge from a guru or a master, hold on to it, pursue it, intensify it, and you'll see that ultimately the disciple and the guru becomes one. As I said, I am thee, thou art I. He says the guru and the disciple becomes one. The seer and the scenery becomes one. You know, I and God becomes one. And this is what Swamiji's teachings are. Though the material identity is limited, the material identity can transcend the limitedness through this intensive introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation. This is what the essence of the I God philosophy. It is to show us a path towards our own reality, our own identity that is universal and transcending. And if we have that, that kind of mindset, our material experiences in life becomes really awesome and inspirational, that we will be able to see that universal divinity in everything that we experience, everything that we do, and our life becomes that universal experience. And that's what makes life an awesome journey. This is what Mahan has left us. I hope all of us will pursue this intensively so that one fine day, as what he saw, you know, the last quote, he says that I have realized within myself God in entirety. You know, either today, tomorrow, or maybe sometime in the future, all of us can say, like, hey, I have realized this. This is an awesome experience. And this is what this Mahan has left us. And I wish all of you all will take some time to pursue this and have that beautiful experience that he had, and many of us have that experience, so that you also have an enriching experience. Sandosham.